2013, I had an opportunity to examine some of the Italo-Mycenaean pottery from two important sites, Colloque and Broglio di Trevisace, and to admire some of the fragments of pictorial pottery from the site of Termitito displayed in the Museum of Metaponto. Since then, I have been waiting for an opportunity to present some of my thoughts on this material, and I would like to thank Jan Driessen for accepting my contribution and hence providing an opportunity at this conference. Italo-Mycenaean pottery in general, and the mechanisms behind its appearance in particular, are topics extensively discussed in scholarly literature over the last 30 years or so. A recently published book by Richard Jones, Sarah Levy, and Marco Bettelli and Lucia Vagnetti, with contributions by more than 10 authors, provides an invaluable compendium of this and related case classes, including primary chemical data resulting from a large number of analyses. And I'm showing you the cover of the book on the left hand and the poster advertising the book presentation. And I like this pair because this is a pot from Broglio di Trevisace and the other one is from Termitito, and these are exactly the two sites I'm going to discuss in detail. The most recent publication, at least to my knowledge, that tackles the issue of mechanisms of this particular case of technological transfer is contained in a very valuable book entitled Human Mobility and Technological Transfer in the Prehistoric Mediterranean, edited by Evangelia Kyriazi and Karl Nappert. In one of the articles of that volume, Evangelia Kyriazi and Stelios Andreou discuss imports and local production of Mycenaean pottery in various areas of the Mediterranean, northern Greece, southern Italy, Cyprus, and Near East. These case studies provide opportunity for comparison of circumstances of production and consumption of locally produced Mycenaean pottery, highlighting important differences that led authors to suggest different scenarios. Their approach was very helpful for me in thinking about this presentation, but it is a coincidence that yet another paper in this book provided this decisive incentive to present the paper today. It was a commentary to the papers that make up the book by Olivier Gosselin. There he writes, and I quote, "Spatial mobility in times of conflict does not only concern people fleeing to more secure areas, but also the forced relocation of captives. As the latter are frequently associated with production activities and are sometimes specifically targeted for their skill, Cameron has recently urged archaeologists to examine their possible role as agents of cultural change. Surprisingly, given the importance of slavery in Mediterranean history, none of the contributors to this volume pays attention to them. Is it because of their poor archaeological visibility, or because we still have difficulty considering marginality and bottom-up processes of cultural change in our archaeological reasoning?" End of quote. This remark made me realize that thinking about human mobility, and mobility of potters in particular, I had subconsciously assumed more or less free will of the potters, deciding about the destination of their movement and the duration of their stay. In the simple typology of mobile potters I came up with, there was no place for those moving involuntarily. Obviously, it goes without saying that potters' motivations to move and the duration of their stay have a poor archaeological visibility, as supposed by Gosselin, but this does not mean that they cannot be investigated. The mentioned contribution by Kyriazi and Andreou offers a good example of how a combination of a close focus on a region and comparative analysis between various areas can shed light on some of the aspects of mobility. Yet before I will attempt to put Gosselin's suggestion of involuntary relocation into test using Italo-Mycenaean pottery as my case study, I would first like to discuss if such instances, that is of captive potters, are known to us from other areas and periods. One of the best examples, and a rather exotic one, is the targeted capture of Korean potters during Japanese invasion on Korea, which started in 1592 AD, and was actually aimed at China, which they never reached. This war is sometimes referred to as Pottery War. Prior to the invasion, Korean ceramic products were highly esteemed and played an important role in Japanese tea ceremonies. Throughout the 6-year-long campaigns, a number of potters have been involuntarily relocated to Japan and started their new workshops there. The most tangible result of this forced relocation is the establishment of thriving ceramic industry, specializing in high-quality porcelain and glazed wares that with time became a major object of Japanese exports. Moving back to the Mediterranean, and in fact mainland Greece and Attica, a recently published research suggests possibility of a forced relocation of potters from the island of Aegina. Gudrun Klebiner-Gauss and Sarah Strack, studying the Aeginetine pottery production in the historical times, established that by the late 5th century BC, a new class of pottery, cooking pottery, I thought I'm not mentioning anything, is produced in Attica, which is quite distinct in its technological signature from the typical Attic production, but at the same time faithfully follows the chaîne opératoire of the Aeginetine cooking pottery production as known from earlier finds. And you have an example of Aeginetine pottery produced on Aegina on your left hand, and Aeginetine type pottery produced in Attica. And the similarity of forms is important, but it's not really the most important issue when we talk about the hypothesis. This is the entire technological process behind, which is exactly the same. It's just the clay is different. This phenomenon coincides with the historical event of expulsion of Aeginetines from their island in 431 BC, following the conquest of the island by Athens in 456 BC. It is unclear whether the expulsion affected the entire population of Aegina, which seems rather unlikely, or only specific subsets of the society, like citizens, elite families, or rich individuals. As the authors stress, and I quote, it remains unclear at any rate whether the potters were among those expelled from the island or if they left voluntarily. Even though, end of quote, even though cooking pots are hardly comparable with porcelain tea bowls, I'm inclined to see a similar scenario quite likely. And as authors point out, early in the 5th century BC, the potters working on Aegina were unwilling to do so, as no Aeginetine workshop has been established in Attica before the mentioned events. However, even if the decision to move their workshops to Athens was their own, it was still an example of a forced migration, as they were pushed from their homeland by deteriorating economic conditions of running their operations on Aegina following the takeover of the island and then the drastic depopulation of the island that was clearly the effect of 431 BC event, even if it did not directly affect potters. This example is a good illustration of difficulties we encountered trying to trace forced relocation of potters even in historical times. Except for the case of Japan, potters usually possessed a relatively low social status and hence rarely feature in literary sources. This problem becomes more acute when we move back to the Bronze Age period, where no proper literary sources exist for the mainland, Greece or Crete, not to mention Central Mediterranean. Linear B accounts are not particularly helpful, but it is worth recalling what John Papadopoulos speculated on the issue of potters' mobility from this imperfect source back in 1997. He thought to focus on the issue of mobility, but he observed that, and I quote, "The question remains whether the process is passive, which implies a forced repatriation, or active, in which relocation involves more subtle factors at play, particularly the element of choice on the part of the craftsperson. Linear B records refer to slaves, which are listed as property of individuals, while the word captive is applied to women, suggesting that labor force was gained by means of rates and that women practiced trades, mostly weaving, as was mentioned in the introduction yesterday by Jan. We can now turn to the evidence I would like to test for the hypothesis of forced relocation of captive potters. Before I do so, I would like to make two reservations. First, this presentation is very much work in progress. Secondly, my intention is not to explain the entire phenomenon of Italo-Mycenaean pottery with this hypothesis, but simply to check if it can be used as a useful concept. The so-called Italo-Mycenaean pottery, that is, pottery of Mycenaean or Minoan actually type produced in Italy, is a phenomenon that possibly starts already in the 14th century BC, but is associated mainly with 13th and even more 12th century BC. It is preceded by more or less sporadic importation of Mycenaean pottery beginning already with the LH1 to 2 period, and the process continues even when the local production gets firmly established. It must be stressed that local pottery at the time of the appearance of Italo-Mycenaean pottery differed almost in every respect of the manufacturing process, from selection of place to the firing. I will focus on the earlier part of the phenomenon, that is the 13th century BC, since, as I will try to show, particular socio-political organization of the Eastern Mediterranean at that time is of crucial importance when assessing the validity of various explanatory scenarios proposed so far. Such a choice limits the number of sites that can be subjected to a detailed discussion of the Italo-Mycenaean products. While such pottery has been identified as a large number of settlements in southern Italy and neighboring islands, and this map shows both Italo-Mycenaean pottery and Mycenaean imports, many of them produced either fragments dated to 12th century BC or pieces so fragmented that a more precise dating cannot really be achieved. Therefore, I will focus on two sites only, Broglio di Trevisace in northeastern Calabria and Termitito in Basilicata, numbers 32 and 39, respectively. The third site that has been extensively discussed in literature, with reference to its Italo-Mycenaean pottery, Roccavecchia in Apulia, number 17, did not produce enough of the 13th century material to be included here. However, it is important to stress the presence of Minoan style vessels at that site, dated on stylistic grounds to LM 382, locally produced and hence one of the earliest Italo-Mycenaean products. In fact, Italo-Mycenaean is a misnomer here, and indeed for a number of other vessels as well, and I shall come back to this Minoan connection later. The assemblage from Termitito is quite impressive, not only for Italian circumstances. It includes the largest collection of pictorial style pottery found in Italy, and according to chemical analysis, they are not imports. I mean, they are not imports from the mainland, from Greece. Some of the fragments are so distinct that it was possible to ascribe them to particular hands recognized within the corpus of Mycenaean pictorial pottery. Vase painting, in particular the Proton A painter and the Kyridis A painter, both chronologically situated in the mid-LH3P period, that is the mid-13th century BC. Some of the fragmentary preserved scenes are unique to the entire corpus, like the depiction of the stirrup jar here, and the whole scene, which is interpreted as a sacrifice. Other non-pictorial vessels include a variety of bowls, some of them following closely standard Mycenaean repertoire, while others with a carinated profile and thus possibly referring to local impasto shapes. There is also a unique calyx with horizontal handles and monochrome painted interior, and several examples of close shapes with comparatively wide necks and variously placed handles. We shall come back to this particular form later on. The potters responsible for the material from Termitito had also a predilection for the narrow zonal motifs, as visible on the slide. This short survey can be summarized with two important observations. Not only is the pottery from the site within the realm of the best products of Mycenaean pottery industry of the time, but also is there an evidence for hybridization. Let us now turn to Broglio di Trevisace, another site with fair quantities of Italo-Mycenaean pottery from 13th century BC. Here we don't find any pictorial decoration that would allow one to speculate in such a detailed fashion about the stylistic affinities of the potter at work. But the decoration is distinct enough, and links not only with Mycenaean but also with Minoan pottery have been highlighted. However, the most common shape, the jar with tall neck and horizontal handles, variously placed on the body, which is also a bearer of some of those Minoan or Minoanizing motifs, is not only a direct borrowing from the Minoan or Mycenaean repertoire, and has been a bit of a headache for those dealing with pottery from Broglio. But since it appears to be a sort of a hybrid, the direct antecedents are difficult and perhaps not necessary to point out. On the other hand, there is an interesting link with the local impasto jars of similar form. On the other, several features suggest this vessel was used as a crater. Not only do some of those jars have a painted band painted low on the interior side of the vessel, which is a direct reference to numerous standard craters that have internal bending that may have been used as a guide as to how much wine should be mixed with water. Moreover, their interiors sometimes display careful burnishing, and I hope it's visible on the slide, a feature that would be hard to explain if it was a standard cloth sheet. More examples of such craters come from the central hut at Broglio, a context belonging already to the 12th century BC. However, the motifs decorating most of them are more common in Crete during LM3A2 and LM3B than in LM3C. If this is correct, then this apparent conservatism may tell us something more about the potter who made them. Beyond the Italo-Mycenaean pottery, Broglio is also distinguished by two other pottery groups represented in quantity that owe their existence to the introduction of technology derived from the Aegean. The most distinct one is the so-called greyware. It is made with the use of wheel and firing and partly reducing atmosphere to achieve the gray surface. The sheets are mostly derived from local repertoire and majority consist of open forms, but Mycenaean ones do infrequently occur. Finally, there are large pithoi, decorated with plastic bands that, in the later stage of the local Bronze Age, bear impressions or impressed or incised decoration. Such large storage jars have not been produced before in southern Italy, and they clearly require special skill. What kind of explanations have been given to the appearance of Italo-Mycenaean pottery from the moment of its proper identification as locally produced? Quite aptly, some kind of movement of craftsmen from the Aegean was assumed from the very beginning, since this situation was recognized as an instance of a clear technology transfer to an area where none of its most important features were present before. It was also assumed that this movement was on a seasonal or temporary basis, but there were also other explanations proposed. To provide you with an example, Lucia Vagnetti was developing scenarios explaining presence of Minoan traits in the Italo-Mycenaean pottery. Should we visualize a group of potters from Crete, repeatedly visiting this area during the 13th century BC, attracted here for reasons that we do not yet understand? Or should we visualize itinerant Western potters who learned new techniques and skills in Crete, returning to Italy to produce their vessels according to the new procedures without transmitting their secrets to other native craftsmen? End of quote. A slightly more definite stance is provided in the 2014 volume on Italo-Mycenaean pottery. Richard Jones suggests that in the initial stage, so the 13th century BC, Aegean potters established workshops in major coastal sites, probably operating in small groups. Only very few of them were itinerant, according to him. They were assimilated into local societies and they established contacts with local potters, first informal, then more formalized, taking young local potters as apprentices who then spread to further areas. He imagines that within a century, production of Italo-Mycenaean pottery went into the hands of local potters. This is clearly much more of a story, but one that is not backed by much firm evidence or extensive discussion. For the site of Termitito, precise narratives have been offered, especially since it is a unique situation in which we can follow, if not a particular potter, then at least a person trained within a particular workshop or workshops. When discussing the pictorial pottery from the site, Lucia Vagnetti tied it to the developments in the argolith in a rather speculative but most interesting manner. She referred to the fate of the Verbati workshops, which most likely were the production place of the LH3B pictorial pottery that was exported eastwards. The workshops were given up somewhere within the LH3B period, and Vagnetti suggested that some of the potters might have tried their luck in, and I quote, a new and developing world. A different scenario is proposed by Rankat Jung. In his opinion, at least one painter from Basilicata learned his craft in the palatial pottery workshop of the Argolith and then moved back to southern Italy. He prefers this hypothesis over the one just discussed because of the lower quality of paint of the Termitito pottery, which is almost always a bit dull, and which would not have been the case if it was an Argive potter or potter's move. It's time to discuss the objections one can raise concerning these variable, very variable explanations and whether and how the hypothesis of captive potters could help us to overcome them and possibly provide some better explanation for observed phenomena. First problem, if we accept that these Aegean potters who move, if we accept that these were Aegean potters that move, concerns their motivations to relocate to or to undertake itinerant pottery. Southern Italy, and I must stress that this concerned 13th century BC, can hardly be considered a prime destination for a potter to move, unless some very specific motivations were at play, which we cannot really investigate. Nevertheless, we can assume that such individual motivations could explain single instances of relocation, but not the entire phenomenon. First of all, we should ask if there was a pressure for the potters to leave the mainland, or Crete, during the 13th century BC, that would result, for instance, from deteriorating economic conditions for their activities. This cannot be excluded, but at least for the mainland, it can be assumed that as long as the palaces functioned, there was a constant demand for masses of pottery that were consumed during public feasts organized by the palace. A good impression about the quantities in question is provided by the Palace of Pylos, or at the lower level, but still impressive level, by pottery storerooms at Zigurias or the House of the Sphinxes at Mycenae. Even if we would like to see the beginning of a crisis in pottery production already in the 13th century BC, its extent would still be small when compared to the following 12th century, after the collapse of the palatial system, when potters' mobility was most likely at its height. Secondly, what would be the places that a potter would have chosen to relocate? Other regions of Mycenaean Greece or Crete are first destinations that come to mind, especially if the potter held some personal family ties to one of the areas. But if the business was not good in the other parts of his world, and there was a need for a more dramatic destination, many ethnographic examples make it quite clear that potters relocate to places they either personally know, because of earlier episodes of itinerant potting or other kinds of relationship, or places at which their products were widely consumed. This pattern of relocation appears to be the case for the 12th century BC potters from Aegina. My collaborative research has shown that they moved to several places along the Euboean Gulf, which all have one thing in common. They were recipients of Aeginetine cooking pottery before. Could southern Italy be considered a major recipient of Mycenaean or Minoan pottery in the 13th century BC or earlier? Without undermining the importance of Aegean imports found there, it seems obvious that areas to the east of the Aegean, that is Cyprus or Levant, were receiving bulk amounts of Aegean pottery and thus would constitute, in my opinion, much better first choices for potters to immigrate. This is particularly true of pictorial pottery produced in Barbati workshops and possibly elsewhere. It was meant specifically for customers in the east, and virtually none of it made its way to the west. Therefore, I consider it very unlikely that potters from such workshops would voluntarily choose to move to Italy. The areas east of the Aegean were also very similar on the level of socio-political organization, which is another important aspect of these considerations, and one that could influence potters' choices. In the slide, the hypothesis offered by Reinhard Jung for the Termitito potter-painter, that it was a person originating from Italy that received training, is much better suited to explain these particular circumstances. This explanation works quite well for this specific case, but obviously cannot be applied to explain the entire phenomenon, as we would have to imagine quite a number of apprentices from Italy working in Aegean workshops. How is then the hypothesis of captive potters fitting in here? First, we should discuss if there is any evidence for raids on the mainland or Crete that could result in captured individuals, including craftsmen. There is indeed a fair amount of precaution taken by the Mycenaean palaces from the mid-LH3B onwards, while one can argue that the causes of the destructions that affected at least Argolid during that time were natural. Their aftermath clearly suggests that there was a threat caused by human agency. Houses outside of the citadel of Mycenae had not been rebuilt after the destructions, and the activities that took place in them were moved most likely inside the walled space. Lower Citadel at Tyres was fortified for the first time. In addition, citadels at Mycenae, Tyres, and Athens secured access to underground sources of water, clearly on the event of a siege. At Pylos, changes in architectural layout of the palace suggest concern with the circulation of people and goods and general access. Most likely, also the decision to relocate at least part of the perfumed oil industry to within the palace is an extraordinary sign of precaution and concern. Furthermore, the Oka series of the Pylian tablets refer to coastguarding activities, and some have argued that this was not an emergency measure, but rather a routine activity. What could be the cause of all these developments? As Reinhard Jung and Matthias Mehofer argue, and I quote, "It is not rather relevant that warriors operating from the western coasts of the Adriatic were organizing pirate attacks against at least the western coast of the Peloponnese," and I assume we can make here more about that in just 5 minutes. I would go as far as to argue that one of such raids might have contributed to the capturing of one or more Mycenaean potters who then settled somewhere close to the site of Termitito and produced the pictorial pottery. But what about the lower quality of paint that Reinhard reported for the Termitito vessels? I do not think that there is a good reason to believe that a trained potter, who otherwise mastered the skill of potting and painting, would not be able to reproduce a matching quality of paint. I'm rather inclined to think that it was a matter of availability of appropriate raw materials in the new setting. Alternatively, the soil conditions might have a very considerable effects on the preservation of painted decoration, even within nearby locations, as I had an opportunity to discover during my current work at the Athenian Agora. Let us now turn from a very specific focus on the potters from Termitito to the more general features of Italo-Mycenaean pottery from the 13th century BC, and how these can be explained with the hypothesis of potters in captivity. Common feature of both discussed assemblages is the presence of hybrids. This would appear to be in favor of the hypothesis of people originating in Italy and being trained in the Aegean, as they would possess more direct knowledge of local forms and production. However, as Kyriazi and Andrea will stress, the aspect of the local production that is mixed with Aegean pottery is that of the form, that is an aspect most easily accessible to an external observer, and an aspect that can be copied by merely looking at the vessel. As such, this does not require any kind of interaction at all. Besides, there is barely any sign of a direct contact, exchange, or integration between the bearers of the two traditions, at least not during the early stages. If it were representatives of local population responsible for the transfer of Aegean potting technology, one would expect more interaction reflecting good interaction within the local society. In Macedonia, where the degree of interaction seems to be more substantial, suggesting a different relationship between Mycenaean and non-Mycenaean potters, we see Mycenaean-style pottery made with coarser, non-calcareous paste or fire in much simpler installations. As the opposite seems to be true for Italy, a captured foreigner, possibly treated as a slave, was most likely separated from the rest of the local society, or at least had much lower chances for integration and interaction with locals, including members of his trade. As tightly attached to his master, he would have to follow his directives, and this could explain presence of hybrids. They were most likely made to order and were not merely a product of potters' initiative to please the tastes of the local population. It is also instructive to look at the functional aspects of the Italo-Mycenaean assemblage. These are decorated tablewares, but more precisely tablewares that would serve as a drinking set, most likely for wine that would be diluted in those hybrid craters. Therefore, they were designed to serve specific behavior or style that was most likely promoted by and restricted to the elites of the local societies, those that were able to concentrate more resources and compete for power. Speaking of resources, sudden appearance of pithoi is an important aspect of the possibly close tie between potters and those better supplied with agricultural produce. Pithoi also provide an opportunity for display, as they are impressive and large vessels that can hold huge amount of produce and could have formed another part of power strategies. Also, the most innovative group of related pottery, the greyware, has a limited array of shapes and hence functional connotations. Its introduction is important as it's most likely intended to imitate the appearance of silver and can be seen as another attempt by some members of local population to accumulate prestige and power, this time perhaps by emulating consumption patterns and styles entertained by the elites in the Aegean and beyond. If this was the case, one would expect that such products had a restricted circulation, as only through such control, elements of material culture can retain their higher and often symbolic value. Indeed, greyware is found only in a limited area of southern Italy. Again, if this was the invention of an independent potter, no matter if Aegean or only Aegean trained, we could expect a broader circulation of such vessels, as he would be interested in maximizing his profits through expanding the distribution area. Restricted circulation is generally a feature of the Italo-Mycenaean pottery as well. Archaeometric analyses have shown that products of local workshops rarely find their way into other regions. If not a consequence of the more general trends, this for me is also an indication of some sort of control over the output. An exception to the rule is Punta di Zambrona, where circa 10% of tested sherds proved to derive from northern Calabria. But at the same time, it is a site which does not provide evidence for local production. Finally, innovations such as greyware are risky under normal circumstances, as their production engages part of limited resources, and as such, they go hand in hand with uncertainty, which would be a normal situation if an Aegean potter moved to a new social and geographic environment. Therefore, also in this aspect, a particular kind of attachment of a potter to his master seems to offer a more plausible explanation. Concluding, I would like to reiterate the observation of Oliver Gosselin that we have not attached enough attention to the possible role of captives in the cultural process we study, at least for the late Bronze Age. Even though primary evidence for the raids on the Greek mainland or Crete is missing, there is enough of hints that they might have occurred in the 13th century BC, and if so, they offer an excellent opportunity to capture and most likely enslave parts of the local population. It is highly unlikely that potters would have been specifically targeted, as in the case of the Korean Pottery War, but they would definitely constitute a valuable booty, especially that Mycenaean or Minoan pottery has been known and appreciated in southern Italy. Many aspects of Italo-Mycenaean pottery seem to be well explained by the hypothesis. However, it is not my intention to ascribe production of all of the Italo-Mycenaean pottery to captives. My aim was rather to show that there is yet another explanation in addition to those already offered. The phenomenon we described under the heading of Italo-Mycenaean pottery was an outcome of a number of individual stories, some of which might have included episodes of involuntary human mobility. Thank you.